By the time the English evolved in the neck of Denmark, where in the land called England, the first England, they were thoroughly part of the Roman world. This meant that they were thoroughly civilized as far as their civil time activities were, but during war they could be brutal. Migration era warfare demanded the destruction of whole families of people, whole races in fact. The English did commit genocide in Britain against the Welsh. But what kind of men were these? Were they despotic monsters, the English warrior? And what does their beginnings have to say about the rest of their development towards the famous redcoats of the Victorian age, who met out such harsh actions against the Boers, for instance? Well, the Boers and the English, of course, have a common ancestry, and what comes across it also in this book, which I will read for speed, Stephen Pollington's The English Warrior, is their humanity as well. Poetry, for instance, was the great consolation, and song was a great consolation of the Nordic warrior, the Nordic English warrior of the Baltic region, before and after their move to England, to Britain, to create England. He suffers much less who knows a number of songs. The Nordic warriors of England were not just brutish louts. They respected skill with words as much as skill as arms. They valued the good reputation and lasting memory the poet could confer on them. Their halls were scenes of merrymaking and laughter, more often than gloomy apprehension or artful menace. The life of the warrior could be short. While wine and women were among their transient pleasures, song had a place too. For instance, in the poem where a warrior is trying to find a master or an employer rather, from there I travelled around the homeland of the Goths. I always looked for the best of comrades. That was the household troop of Imanric, king of the Goths. Stephen Pollington goes on. There can be little doubt of the twin influences of Rome and Central European tribes, the Celts, Dacians and others, set off a change in the social systems of the Nordic North, sometime in the later few centuries before Christ. What had been a relatively stable backwater of farming communities going about their daily business, seldom engaging in more strenuous military activity than cattle raiding and occasional forays against suddenly weakened neighbours, became a very quickly a war-dominated society, which only the totally unimaginative were content to earn their living by the plough. The catalyst to the sudden explosion of military activity in the north were the introduction of iron weapons from Central Europe, and the opening of cultural horizons through trade contacts with the Empire, and I would also say China and India. The Roman Empire, that is, which had taken the rule of neighbouring Gaul away from the native aristocracy in the 1st century BC. This was the time of Julius Caesar and Vercingetorix. The Gauls had been assisted by Nordic tribes from across the Rhine called the Suebi, who would later become known as the Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons, later on still. It was the practice of these people, Caesar tells us in his Gallic War, to field a force of cavalry, each horseman in the force having selected an infantryman to fight with him, whose function it was to support the cavalry and to surround and protect any fallen rider. These infantry were extremely fast and agile and could keep up with the horsemen, although over a longer advance or retreat they would hang on to the horses' manes and hitch a ride to preserve their strength. These remarkable Nordic Panzer or English Panzer Grenadiers were used in the support of the Gaulish leader Aristeus in his bid to keep the Roman power south of the Alps. So this was the beginnings of early English warriorhood, but they were unsuccessful in trying to protect Gaul. What did happen was that the Romans expanded their power into Gaul. The empire was to some extent the architects of its final destruction by the Nordic warbands. The threat posed by the peoples from across the northwestern boundary to the prosperity of Gaul and Central Europe was such that the imperial powers had to strengthen their defences. This involved sending large numbers of men to the frontier, all of whom had to be paid from the imperial coffers and supplied with food and other essentials. And in my view, this is what caused the hyperinflation in the Roman Empire, which effectively destroyed it. Because there was unrelenting pressure from the Nordic peoples, especially the English-dominated Alemanni alliance, which continued from the time of Julius Caesar right through to when various his legions were destroyed by Hermann and Augustus, under the Emperor Augustus, right on through to when the Romans made a foray into the heartland of the Nordic people and dealt the English a defeat near the neck of Denmark in England. Going back to what I was saying, this trend tended to move well from the centre of the empire to its borders, therefore made the borders much more rewarding targets for the enemy. Further, the legions increased wealth and crucial importance, put them in a position where they were effectively able to decide which of the various candidates could become emperor. Where various legions backed different men, there would inevitably be rivalry, dissension and political manoeuvring, all of which distracted leaders from the intentions for the real purpose of containing their Nordic enemies. What was the English warrior's way? I cannot do justice to this entire subject, so you will have to read the book. The ISBN number is 189828110-6. A wise man must be patient, must not be too hot-headed or too hasty in speech, nor too bashful in battle or too blindly reckless, nor too craven, nor too carefree, nor too keen for wealth, nor too fond of boasting before he fully understands. The Wanderer. Warriors were not born with the skills that they would need in later life. They had to set out and acquire dexterity with various weapons, fast reactions, and a feeling for tactics. For some, strength, speed, and weapon skills were enough to enable them to earn a living, but others, a narrower outlook was needed, specialising in fighting on board ship, or guarding bridges or doorways, or in attacking quickly on foot, or whatever. No doubt, no matter what skills a man possessed, there was an opportunity to deploy them somewhere within the migration age. Moreover, many more of the accomplishments which served the warrior could be acquired through hunting and would serve equally well for that purpose. Speed, accuracy, strength and agility were all essential to both pursuits. For instance, the hunting aspect does not, that Stephen Pollinson mentions there, does not take away from the fact that the Anglo-Saxon armies, the Freed and the Heer systems, both provided training and armaments and equipment, and there was Bookland, which is an early form of the civil service, which provided swords and equipment to the men. Also, you can see that when the English deployed the shield wall against the checkerboard system, which came from the Roman Empire to the Welsh, that was very effective. The English warrior thus set out the next stage, which was to create regimental systems which last to this day. Thank you for listening.